right, welcome to the show. We are live on YouTube. It is Thursday, and right now, GitHub is down, so you should be here. You should hang out here. We could talk about Docker and DockerCon, and I've got two great guests today on the show. And if you're new to this show before, basically this is one part us talking about what's going on, what's current events, and sometimes I have guests like today, sometimes I don't, and then we take Q&A later. So if you have specific container questions, Docker questions, stuff like that, get them in early, and we will basically try to get to them in order later on in the show. Of course, if we miss your question or you have to step away, feel free to watch this show later because it will be live on these channels, or it'll be replayable on these channels later, both on Docker and my own channel. We're dual streaming today again, both to Docker's YouTube channel and my own. And with me today, I have two captains. I think this is the first time we've ever had two captains on the show. I think this is a day. Oh, looks my computer is doing funny things. And with me today, we're going to introduce the amazing Laura Tacho down at the bottom. And you might know her as Laura Frank if you've seen her in conferences before or on the internet. She works with CloudBees on all things CI/CD. So if you've got continuous integration testing questions, anything related to CI/CD or automation of pushing your code into servers, she is definitely the person to ask. And she is the VP of Engineering at CloudBees, which actually, is that right?
You can give me that promotion. I'm just I'm a director.
I got you a promotion. You know, why
Thanks,
not?
Brett. I hope my boss is watching.
Yes. Well, you should be the VP of Engineering, and but for now you're the director, which is awesome. And I'm very proud of watching your career over there and watching all the success you've had there. She is the OG Docker captain, one of the original captains from the first cohort back in
2015. Barcelona 2015, remember? Yeah.
That was a while ago. And got started with Docker in 2013, doing really cool stuff. And she's happy to see Open Source Summit back on the agenda at DockerCon. So are we all. And she's based in Austria, not Australia, two opposite sides of the world. Thanks for joining us, Laura.
Yeah, happy to be here, Brett. You wouldn't be surprised, or you would be surprised how many people I say I live in Austria, and then they ask me about kangaroos or something. It's a real problem.
Yes, you probably don't have any kangaroos there, do you?
At the zoo, I think there might be some.
At the zoo. Is it the, this is not Australia? Is that that should be the name of the kangaroo at your, yeah, this is not Australia. Also with us on the call, I'm going to say call because on the live show, like I don't know what to call it. We have Marcus Lilljedahl from Argentina, and so we are now on 3 continents at this current moment, which is pretty exciting. He is a VP of engineering.
Right.
How do you say the company's name?
Unigo.
Unigo.
Yeah.
And he's also Docker captain, open source lover. You know him probably best on the internet from Play with Docker. If you've ever used Play with Docker, that he is the co-founder of that idea and basically built the core feature set in one night with a lot of beer at DockerCon. So if you ever want to know where cool Docker stuff comes from, it often comes from people at DockerCon. While we're at DockerCon, he is a helmsman. He is a captain of real boats, where we are pretend captains on the internet. And he's an avid wine drinker and participated and won 2 Docker Global Hackathons, along with the infamous Jonathan with his projects Whaleprint and CMT, which is Container Migration Tool. And he co-created Play with Docker, Play with Kubernetes, Nomad and Moby, and some of the other open source projects, and is currently in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Brett. Glad to be here to share some time with you and Laura, of course, like amazing team. And I recall the days that Laura was mentioning in Barcelona 2015, where it wasn't called Docker Captains at the time, wasn't it? It was like a Docker community member program or something.
Yeah, I think we had community leaders, and then bloggers and speakers were all separate. And I have a distinct memory of Adam, who used to be our Sherpa, coming down that big escalator with the new Docker Captains hoodies and handing them out. And then that was our birth.
that was it. Yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah, that was. Those were good days, and we miss Adam still to this day. If he's around on the internet, please come back.
I hope he's watching. Hi, Adam. We miss you.
Yes. He's a globetrotter now and traveling all over the world. Of course, he was doing that at Docker, but he's still hanging out in conferences and doing all kinds of cool stuff like that. So, well, we had Jenny on the show last week, which is the admirable admiral of the captains. She takes care of us just as good as he did. So we're very glad to have her and everyone else at Docker that takes care of the community. All right, so let's talk. We talked a whole lot last week about DockerCon. We won't necessarily talk about it as much this week, so let's just get some of those DockerCon things out of the way. First up, we have a coupon. If you haven't signed up for DockerCon and you've been thinking about DockerCon, and it's only 3 weeks away, so you don't have much time left. But if you're thinking, there is now a YouTube coupon. Use the coupon code YouTube or the promo code or discount code or whatever it's called, and it gets you at least 20% off, I think. I'm not sure the exact percentage, but it gets you a lot. So you should try that out. And that's for being here on the show. That coupon is nowhere else. What else we got? We got DockerCon. We're all doing stuff at DockerCon. So Laura, what are you presenting this year? Are you doing multiple things? What's going on?
Well, I guess in addition to being some of the most photographed people at the keynotes, along with you, Brett, which I'm seeing all these photos of the two of us like looking like dorks at the keynote.
Yes.
I'll be doing that. I'm also giving a talk on, I believe, Tuesday in the afternoon around 4:30. I would have to actually double check on building your development pipeline. And I'm giving this talk with Ali, who is an engineer at Docker, and we're going to talk about everything CI, CD, and Docker together. So not necessarily just deploying your application that's using containers, but also using Docker as part of your pipeline. So how can you build images in your pipeline? Do you have to mount the Docker socket? Do you need to give privileged access? You don't have to do either. Come to our talk to find out. We'll also talk about kind of balancing serverless techniques and then having long-running masters, for example, if you're using Jenkins. And we'll have a couple cool demos on Windows and on Linux. And then otherwise, I'm going to be just hanging out, maybe doing some hallway tracks. Looking forward to meeting lots of new folks.
Yeah, hallway tracks. We talked a lot about that last week. Basically, one of the best features of DockerCon, where you can make up your own topic and then meet with other people in a nice, comfortable area with great seating and snacks and people to help you. And yeah, it's really cool. And it's like birds of a feather, but even less work for the people that are organizing, because you just have to have the topic. All right, Marcos, what are you doing at DockerCon besides running the show for all the workshops single-handedly?
Oof, yeah, that's gonna be tough, Brett. So yeah, basically, if any of you have attended to previous DockerCons, either Europe or San Francisco, and if you actually went through hands-on labs or workshops, now it's good to know that those are mainly powered, aside the fact that some people prefer to run on AWS, which I'm not going to mention. But mostly all of the workshops are running under Play with Docker infrastructure, which is pretty cool. I mean, the fact that a Hacky project came out of the community, then it became popular, and now Docker decided that it's a nice way to, teach people and to provide infrastructure for attendees to actually run their content on. So basically, I go there and make sure that everything runs smoothly. You don't run into any issues because, provisioning several hundreds of VMs on demand for a conference party is not easy. Maybe that's a tale for a talk or something.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be mostly there, and of course, sharing my knowledge and learning new stuff. Looking forward to get involved into CNAB, cool things that are going out of 1903 beta or release candidate, and as Laura said, chatting with people, making contacts and learning new things all the way.
Right. Yeah, just a few things. In case you didn't know, so Play with Docker, it's play-with-docker.com. If you haven't been there, I don't know what you've been doing all these years, but it is one of the main places you can interactively do real Docker stuff on the internet in your browser without having to have it locally installed. and it's a great place to get some free training. Basically, I think if you is it still listed on Docker's website? If you go to Docker and training, like play with Docker, still in
The
there.
lab site, yeah.
Yeah, so it's essentially officially supported by Docker, and Marcos single-handedly runs that nowadays, and all the improvements, that's him in the background, and a lot of that is open source, I believe. You still got that on GitHub. A lot of that technology is there, and it's pretty great. And since then, we've actually seen different things show up on the internet that are similar to that have their own interface for messing with containers, but Play with Docker was one of the first, if not the first, out there, and I mean, the story of just how the idea was sort of created at DockerCon, and you're like, well, let's just stay up all night and do this. Of course, I'm sure the plan was not to stay up all night, but you did anyway. And at DockerCon, every year, except for maybe once or twice, they have this thing that's called Moby Hacks, which is essentially a world. Anyone who goes to DockerCon, I mean, it don't even have to go to DockerCon, right? Because you actually submit it before DockerCon to see if you win, and then you could go to DockerCon to get the award. But it was essentially do something with containers, Docker usually, right? That is interesting or unique or new. You might be trying to blow up meteors in space. You might be trying to update the operating system software on a quadcopter while it's flying in the middle of the crowd. Like, you might do something like that, and then you would win this award and get to be on stage and show your hack at the end of the conference. And it's really cool because at first it was like single person hacks, but nowadays it's like teams.
Competitive hacking, yeah.
Right. NASA like shows up on the scene, or Google or somebody, and you're like, well, I'm not sure I can compete with that. But certainly over the years, I think they've upped the ante of that award. Didn't you get like a tail, like a metal tail that you put on, like a Moby tail you put on the shelf? Did you get that award, Marcos?
I didn't get that one.
You didn't get that one? I remember one year they were handing out awards. I think that was in Texas or sorry.
Oh yeah, I think it was too early stages for that prize, so too bad. I guess I have to compete again.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You have to just get a third, triple award winner. You can go for that.
That's a good challenge.
Yeah, I remember I was a panel, like a judge for the Moby's Cool Hacks for the year that you submitted whale print. Of course, it was like anonymized from us, so we couldn't see. But I was like, "Oh, this thing is so cool!" And then I was like, "Oh, it's Marcos, great!"
That's nice.
You weren't picking your friends for sure. And if you haven't tried whale print, it's still around, right?
Yeah, it's around, but it's outdated. It was the time when Docker was using DAB files.
Dabs.
Yeah,
DAB files.
So we haven't migrated to Compose yet, but it's something that it hasn't been built into Docker Swarm yet. So maybe it's a good idea to include it as a Docker plugin or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting PR. I'm sure that the community would love that. And so if you didn't know what whaleprint was, one of the things it does several things, but one of the things it can do is it works with Swarm, and it allows you to basically do an export. Let me know if I'm not getting this right. It does an export of all of your services, basically everything that you've configured in your Swarm. It pulls that out as DAB files and allows you to basically import that into another Swarm, and then you could almost have sort of like a backup and restore of your configurations. Is that right?
That's one part, which is pretty nice. But the core idea behind the project is the fact that you can actually compare the state of your current Swarm, which is actually running and might have had modifications because some process actually scaled it up or deployed a new version, with the current files or Compose files or DAB files that you had previously that define your infrastructure. So basically you could say, hey, I want to apply these files these stacks into my current Swarm, which are going to be the changes that are actually going to go through. Like, is it like these images are going to be updated, this service is going to scale up or down in X amount of replicas. So it gives you like visibility of what will happen when you apply some stacks in your Swarm, basically.
Right. I have pull the repo up so people could see it. Yeah.
It's kind of, Marcos, like it's sort of like a Git diff.
Correct.
For your cluster state.
Right. So we actually took the idea from Nomad, which is the orchestrator of HashiCorp. It actually has, or we actually took it from Terraform. If some of you have used Terraform in the past, which I believe pretty much everyone uses it now. So you can do like Terraform plan, and we'll give you an execution plan of how your infrastructure is going to be changed. Well, this is the same concept applied to Swarm, basically.
Right. And this was actually pre-Stacks, right? This is before Swarm had Stacks?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is that part, yeah.
Yeah, that's how long ago this was.
Mm-hmm.
And so Stacks, oops, keep hitting that button. Stacks had, I'm looking in here, Stacks kind of, because when Stacks came out, we had the compose feature built into Stacks, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Or was when the first version of Stacks dab? I think first version of Stacks was dab. I can't remember.
First version of Stacks was dab, yeah.
I think it was dab, yeah. And then they added in compose later. So yeah, it would make sense for this to do compose. But essentially, I think from my point of view, the community didn't really rally around this idea, right? Like, I mean, some people liked it, but we didn't get a huge amount of support. So it didn't get community support in a way that was necessary, because obviously a lot of us like will create ideas on GitHub, open source them, and then if the community doesn't come in and rally around it, it's kind of hard for one person to keep something going when there's not a lot of people using it or helping out. So that's sort of the nature of an open source. Only the necessary and used ideas get a lot of love usually. So cool. Well, I hope there's a future use for it, or if Docker would be willing to take something and add in it. I think a lot of us would really like that dry run feature set in Swarm to know what's going to change, especially I think with stack files, because stack files can get you can put a lot in there and there can be a lot going on. And you know, I've lost count of how many times on Stack Overflow or Docker forums someone's asked, why when I redeployed my stack file did all of my services redeploy, right? And
that's correct.
And in the past we've had bugs, which to my knowledge they're all fixed at this point, but there have been times where services did update when they weren't necessarily needing to be updated. There are some things in Swarm services that you can change, like labels, without technically needing to redeploy the container, and that's a little iffy on whether or not you change something that requires a redeployment. So it would be really cool to have that built in. And I liked it when you first deployed it. I was kind of hoping that it would get support, because it was immediately the kind of thing that I could give to my customers that they had DevOps mindsets around, I want to see the change before I do the change.
Right.
And I feel like the best we have at this point is that you just have 2 clusters. And you do it on the test cluster, and hopefully that'll be exactly what you do in the production cluster. So
that's correct. What I believe is happening is that whenever, and you can tell me your experience with this, but what I see from ops teams is the fact that whenever they need to deploy something, they just push it to production and then see what happens, right? So it could be either that the cluster is running out of resources, so they will have to scale it up. But it's funny because they do that once they actually apply the change. So they actually don't go through the process of saying, okay, what this is going to do to my infrastructure, how this is going to affect my applications. Pretty much everyone assumes what's going to happen, and that's interesting actually to know.
Yeah, it's a little scary. Of course, if you have full automated CI/CD, then like you're just doing that anyway. Like you're rolling it out regardless. But most of us are not there.
There's checks in place though. Yeah. It's like you're not just kind of SSHing into some machine or have your CLI pointing at your remote cluster and making changes there. It like goes through like the automation and checks. But I think it's becoming more common. And I think the folks at Honeycomb have a lot of interesting writing about this, about like testing in production and how that's valid, because really only production is production. So it's just about like, what's the responsibility of each of these steps, and is it risky? Can you minimize risk? If you do, just like push a change to production, scale up, scale down. So I love Whaleprint. I would love to see it make a comeback. I think Whaleprint idea was great. It was just like the dab format never really caught on. So
it was kind of dead on arrival. I think it was it was yet another format and file that we were like, okay, this is cool, but I if Swarm, if millions of people were using Swarm and this was desperately needed, but
I don't know if actually like there's something similar in the kubernetes space also. I don't think so. I haven't seen any of that
on like a dry run.
There's a dry run on Kubernetes, but there's not a diff of what's in the cluster and what's in your manifest files or something.
Right.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's a good point. Although quite frankly, there's so many tools in Kubernetes now. I don't even pretend to think that I could even. I just have to Google it because I can't. Even the lists of tools are not complete lists. So like, you go to CNCF landscape and it's still not everything. I mean, it's just
So it looks like kubectl diff was promoted to beta in 1.13. I don't know. I've actually never heard of that before, so I don't know if that is exactly what we're talking about here, because that's associated with dry run.
Nice.
Yeah, cool. That would be pretty sweet. Yeah, diff, kubectl or kubectl diff does exactly what you want by showing the differences before the current live and the new dry run. It makes it convenient to focus only on the changes that are made to the object. So I think that's the answer.
That qualifies. Yeah. I mean, you said a while ago, like, production is only thing production is production. Like, we have essentially been spending the last 10 years, I feel like, and the majority of the work in the DevOps and Ops space is just to get everything else to be closer to production. We're never really there, but like containers, that was one of the main goals of containers. The not on my works on my machine, scenario. The having a CI/CD system that can spin up clusters and test changes and actually validate those changes. That all of this stuff is just so that we can simply feel like we truly tested in production without actually touching production. I feel like really at the end of the day, it's only as good as your rollback. Like you can.
Absolutely. That like MTTR metric, the mean time to recover, that is key. And understanding if you do something damaging, how long does it take you to get back to the last state that was not bad, or having thresholds in place of like how much data can you lose and making sure that things are really safe to play around. Yeah, we have been spending the last 10 years of trying to make everything like production and ignoring the fact that production's right there. So let's just make it safer to play in production, just a different way of achieving the same thing.
Yeah, so proper metrics in production and know if it went well, and then easy ways to roll back in case it doesn't, right? Yeah. Because that's often, I think, the last thing in small teams and individual DevOps staff, that's the last thing that we do. We usually don't focus on the rollback or the disaster recovery scenarios until things actually happen wrong, and then they finally give us the budget to actually go and spend time to work on that instead of just trying to get code into production. I've been in enough shops where the first thing that gets cut, I always used to talk about IT projects, is the first thing that gets cut is documentation, and the second thing that gets cut from a project due to timing or money is testing rollback or disaster recovery, like actually validating those things. Governments, that's a really bad thing in government. you define the project, and then you go find the money, then you run out of money, and you have to cut stuff out of the project. That's why a lot of mainframes, by the way, are still around, is because the project to get rid of them got far enough to build the new fancy front end, but then the part that got cut from the project often is to migrate the old data into the new systems, so they keep the old systems around for the legacy data. And so many times working in local governments and federal governments, I kept finding that old system's still around because they ran out of money to get the old data out. So they just kept it around, paid the millions of dollars. So Laura, what's going on at CloudBees over there? Like now that I gave you the promotion.
Yeah, now that I've been promoted to VP, Brett, what's my vision? What's not going on? We've had a lot of changes, really positive changes at CloudBees in the past year. So I think CloudBees is often still known as like the enterprise Jenkins company. And that's something that we've embraced in the past, and Jenkins is definitely still a really important part of CI/CD and the CloudBees story, but we've really broadened our horizons in the last 9 months. And I'm working on still CodeShip. So I was with CodeShip before CloudBees acquired us, and now we're sort of one big happy bee family. And then I'm also working on Jenkins X, which is really exciting. So Jenkins X is kind of a developer experience that helps you bootstrap Kubernetes applications and get you running on Kubernetes with a developer experience, and then automating all of the pipelines and stuff to help you get just up and running more easily. Because Kubernetes, as we've just talked about, there's so much stuff in there. There's lots of knobs, lots of levers. So we try to give you like a streamlined approach. So yeah, stay tuned for some big exciting stuff over the next 12 months. We should have some really cool stuff coming out to make developers' lives easier.
Yeah, Jenkins X is pretty exciting. That was I thought when it was announced, it was kind of an unexpected, risky thing to say, hey, we're going to start over. We're going to try this new thing. Yeah,
and you know, kind of the point that you brought up before about open source software in general, and how, like, you know, Marcos had Whaleprint. It's an awesome project, but for one reason or another, I think the DAB format, it didn't catch enough steam. And that was definitely a risk with Jenkins X. So kind of the approach was like, Jenkins is great. It is like the workhorse powering so much software, or the delivery of so much software. But often, you know, if you go to DockerCon and you talk to someone, their opinion about Jenkins is not going to be like, oh my God, it's so cool. They're going to probably roll their eyes and say like, oh, Jenkins. So we thought, like, what can we do to fix that? Or what can we do to sort of turn the project around? And I think it's a 10-plus-year-old project. So we thought, what if we just started with the idea, the problem of what Jenkins is trying to solve, and kind of see what we would do now with modern tools? Like, what would that look like? And that's sort of what Jenkins X turned into.
Right.
So
yeah, I think it was awesome and brave to say, because what is it? The innovator's dilemma. That's I think the terminology we use for, you created something it's become the synonymous with the name of the company. You know, more people probably know the name Jenkins than they know the company CloudBees behind it. And then to take that and say, this is so important to us, we're going to sort of reboot and rethink in a sort of a interesting way how this might work now that we have things like containers and orchestration in the cloud that we didn't have when we created this first concept. So many companies wouldn't do that. You look at examples of like how long it took for Microsoft to actually get an online usable version of Office. You know, it took competitors to show them how to do it before they actually did it themselves. Mostly, I mean, the theory is because they had a billion-dollar business. They didn't want to hurt that revenue of that cash cow. And we call that innovator's dilemma in the startup and business world. And it's cool you did that.
Yeah, right now the struggle is like, you know, in a lot of cases, you mentioned like working a lot in government. It's often that a project makes a choice to use Jenkins or to use CodeShip or to use Circle or something, and that doesn't really change. You get it set up, and then that's kind of what sticks with it. So we have a lot of customers that they maybe set up their software delivery pipeline 6 years ago with Jenkins, and it really hasn't evolved much.
Right.
So we're kind of in this spot right now where we're in a position to really help those types of customers, those types of users modernize their infrastructure. But we need to show them and kind of guide them along that path. And that's where Jenkins X kind of does some proof of concept stuff and can show them what the future can look like. And it makes that migration process or that transition a little bit easier because you have something to look at the end.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the case of so much of the plumbing, right? Of the systems the operating systems. I mean, you know, people still get excited about Linux, but it's not like, you know, you install a Linux server for the 100,000th time in your data center and say, oh yeah, that's so great. I love this operating system. Like, you know, we get a lot of these tools, and that's why I think like there will be a day when Kubernetes is boring and orchestration is boring and containers are boring. And that's what it has to happen, right? We have to get there in order to go to the next, whatever the next abstraction layer is of our software. So great. Unfortunately, so we're gonna have to have you on again and get a demo of Jenkins X, because I get a lot of questions about it.
Definitely.
Totally.
Yeah, and a lot of students ask about which one should I use. There's all these different options. There's Jenkins, there's CodeShip, there's Jenkins X, there's, you know, all these other CI/CD tools out there. How do I know which one to use? And just like orchestration, it always depends.
It depends.
It depends. It's
Yeah.
a consulting answer.
Yeah.
So definitely. Well, thanks for that. Marcos, what is osquery.io?
Oh, that's an interesting project that I came up recently. I mean, actually, someone told me about it. It's not that I discovered it. So it's some sort of agent developed by Facebook. It's pretty big, though, that you can run on your cloud VMs, basically on your servers. And then it gives you like an SQL interface on top of that, where you can actually query everything that's running in there. So you can say, for example, select star from hostname, where, I don't know, name equals something, and it will give you like information about the underlying system. You can query like IO, networking, processes, the profile system of the machine. You can query, even if you have a Docker daemon running, you can query the containers that are running on your machine. So it's like it's pretty cool. It's like a big query, but for infrastructure, basically.
Yeah. And what does it mean? I guess there's a daemon running on each host?
Yeah, there's a daemon running on each host. And something that I would love to see, which is not happening right now, is to be able to deploy it as a, daemon sets on Kubernetes or Swarm services, like one service per machine. And to automatically have this server, like, being discoverable for you. I mean, it's pretty powerful, the fact that you can actually run a query and get insights immediately of all the infrastructure that your system has. You can query the disk space, you can query the memory available, the CPU available, and you can have like nice dashboards and stuff, which is pretty cool.
Oh, that's nice. I mean, how is this different than like SaltStack or other infrastructure tools allow you to query and get information in bulk? How is it? Is it just because is it not for command and control? It's only really for reporting and monitoring and stats and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think it's more oriented to like getting specific insights about what's happening in your system, which you're not going to get from like a typical monitoring tool. Let's say that you have like either Datadog or New Relic or some as a service monitoring solution in your data center. And for some reason, you get alerts because something's not going right, like the CPU of a specific system is like spiking or something is not running properly. So with this, you can actually get a very specific and a directed overview of your whole cluster like right away, instead of having to go to the SSH into the machine and to actually know the commands that you need to run to get that information, right? So let's say that you want to measure CPU and memory, you have to understand about top or the profile system, or to get like the right data, or know the tooling that's underneath that system to get the information. But with this system, you can actually like query it as any relational database using SQL, and you get the information right away. It's pretty powerful, actually.
Yeah. I want to check it out. I like infrastructure tooling. It's basically my life. Well, cool. Well, so we've got lots of other stuff to talk about, but I know there's some people in chat that have been anxiously waiting to discuss their topic. So if either one of you is in the YouTube and you want to cherry pick any questions out, feel free. I'm going to actually scroll through on my channel and see what a question there.
I have a question for Laura, if we have some time, Brett.
Yeah, of course.
So Laura, you know that, well, myself and I believe other people have been looking at like BuildKit lately from basically Docker, or I don't know if it's part of the CNCF now.
BuildKit, no, but it's a Moby project.
Moby, okay.
Yeah.
So how are CI pipelines in general adapting to that new tool or that new way of building stuff, right? Are all the tools out there like implementing this new way of building images, or what's happening in that area?
That's a great question. I love BuildKit. CodeShip right now does not use BuildKit, but I could definitely imagine us using something other than just Docker to build images. So what I've seen mostly is not necessarily embracing those lower level tools, because ultimately a CI/CD service is a CI/CD service and not necessarily image building service. So there's some like pragmatism that comes in there. Like if we have $100 development dollars to spend, can we get image building for $1 with just Docker, or get it for $10 using BuildKit? I think that's probably the reason we don't see it more. But what I have seen a lot of is using Canico to do image building, especially within Kubernetes, because you
Nice.
can build images on your cluster without having to mount the Docker socket or use Docker directly. So that's one big change that I'm seeing. And in fact, Jenkins X is you can have a flag so that you're using Canico with Google Cloud and Google Container Registry. So definitely some innovation happening in the image building space, which is really nice to see, because we saw a lot of changes happening in the orchestration space. And images, Docker files have always been something that Docker pretty much had monopoly over, for better or for worse. I think there's a reason that this is one of the last things to start being changed. But I think, if we ask the same question next year, I'll probably have a much different answer. But BuildKit's super cool. I'm talking about it in our pipeline talk. So if you're at DockerCon, we'll mention it and go over some of the impact that it can have on your pipeline if you want to kind of roll it yourself.
Nice, awesome, thank you.
Yeah, it's hard not to talk about BuildKit once you've played around with it and used it. It's now like it's hard for me to talk more than 5 minutes on Docker and not mention BuildKit at this point.
Yeah,
because it affects everyone. Like if you have ever built an image, it will affect you at some point, whether, because it's not on by default yet, but it will be someday probably. And we've got obviously other tools in the industry. We've got Builda and all sorts of other stuff. And they're all sort of synergizing around this idea of creating a flexible sort of lessons learned right from the past. And I really, but the savings in space, the speed, the synchronous things of, once I saw Gareth at maybe it was O'Reilly Velocity Conference in London. Gareth Rushgrove, I think. Yeah. He, formerly of Docker, was heading up some of their developer tooling, and he gave a talk basically mostly about image building, and he started showing off using this really fancy multi-stage build with build kits, integration and feature set, and then using just a build script, like standard Linux building tools, or a make script rather. And he had this tool that was like way more than what I would ever think a container building tool would do. And his files were very small, very minimal, no repeating of lines, and it was amazing. I have that talk somewhere. I'll have to find that while we're talking, taking questions, and show off those slides and get people to link to that slide, because that was if you're interested in sort of the evolution of where Docker images are going, or just container images in general. I think there's some people out there like Gareth that are sort of forward thinking on how we can use this to automate even more of our software and make it even more like a CI/CD system a little bit. So.
I saw someone in the chat asked a question about these image building enhancements for Windows and whether that's available. So Canico right now doesn't work on Windows, unfortunately, but BuildKit, I believe, does have Windows support, or at least like the build CTL command line does. Do you know, Brett? Because I'm like super not a Windows person, and I don't mean that to disrespect Windows. I just live in a very nice, tidy Linux world.
So yeah, BuildKit is not working on Windows yet, but that is a coming feature. In fact, I think that was one of the goals, was BuildKit working on Windows for 1903 release.
Awesome.
Yeah. And because there's other things, right? BuildKit, that's the reason that BuildKit isn't default out of the box yet. It doesn't yet work with Docker Compose, which that is also in a PR state right now. They have to update, I think, the Compose Pi library or whatever that one's called. I can never remember the name of it. The library for Compose has to be updated to use BuildKit. And then there's some other edge case stuff where it doesn't work in certain scenarios. I'm trying to remember all of them. I had a list at some point, but yeah, Windows was a big one, missing Windows, and obviously Docker being very multi-platform, they before they make it the default builder, they wanted it on Windows, and we'll probably, I don't know if that 1903 meant that it was going to still be experimental on Windows, not experimental, I guess non-default on Windows as well as Linux, because or they're going to like make it the default on Linux but not on Windows. I wouldn't think they'd do that. Of course, we don't really know because none of us really have insider information, but I would think that they'd want to wait until BuildKit was feature comparity across those two major OSs before they made it the default builder, because that's a pretty risky thing, right? For them to suddenly change the entire underlying libraries that build images they definitely. I mean, they've been building it for years. I remember, what was it? Maybe it was back when we were in Texas that we first heard of it at an open source summit. It was that multiple years ago. So they've been working on this for quite some time. So it's pretty stable. But yeah, Windows is coming.
Yeah, and there's tying us back to DockerCon at the open source summit. There is a whole build kit. I think like an hour-long session. So I'm super curious to see what, if any, new things are announced related to build kit, and just get an update on the project.
Yeah. In fact, if you're going to DockerCon, you can find that open source summit agenda on the DockerCon website. There's down at the bottom, there's open source summit, and it's the last day. It's Thursday. So if you're going to DockerCon, the last day is typically the sessions that were voted the top sessions get repeated. Hopefully Laura and I will be repeating our sessions because we'll be top 10 or top 16 or whatever it is. No
top
competition.
Two, Brett.
But
top two.
Top two. Regain my title. Then the agenda shows you this. I just clicked on the wrong button. This open source summit on the afternoon of that day, after we've repeated the same sessions that are the top sessions, there's all this open. So basically this idea is, prior we used to use it in Moby summits, but that it's all Docker's open source tooling that's underneath the Docker that we all know and love. And my most exciting one was all the way down here near at the bottom is SwarmKit. SwarmKit is finally back, getting its own dedicated talk from Docker. And it's from Drew, one of the original. He's been around on SwarmKit for years, working on SwarmKit. And you'll notice some of the upcoming features they mentioned. They tease us: server-side stacks, which we know is coming because they released some open source a month or so ago. Cron job support.
Yeah,
and
finally.
CSI.
Oh man, what the last Docker Captain Summit? I swear we probably spent 2 hours complaining about the lack of cron job support in Swarm, and it was enough. We got our wish. Yeah.
I think after three DockerCons of us ranting and customers obviously ranting and saying, we would love more features in Swarm, please keep adding. I think they finally heard us and put some more effort into it, which is always great. Obviously, they've got priorities. Money talks, so they're going to listen to their customers that are paying for products first, I imagine. A lot of us that use their open source.
Listen to us.
Yeah. Right. And so to set the scene up, for those of you that weren't there, basically the captains get an hour or so with all the executives of Docker, and we get to ask questions. And instead of, obviously lots of great questions were asked, lots of great answers, but for multiple DockerCons now, the conversation ends up shifting to Swarm, and when are they going to add this and that and this and that? And I'm sure that, they would much rather talk about that, we monopolize the conversation a little bit around orchestration because in the past, they've solved a lot of problems, and so this is still an area where there needs to be more added to the solution. So granted, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and we talked it up, and so here we are. Not that we're taking credit, but it didn't hurt. It didn't hurt.
We're just all very excited.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
I'm very excited, especially the fact that these are also birds of a feather sessions. So we'll be able to have conversations. If you are there, you can hang out and we all get to talk. The last time we did that was when we were in Austin a couple years ago, and that was fantastic because you got to sit around with the core engineers of whatever the topic was, build kit, in the engine itself, Swarm kit, you name it. And we got to hang out with those engineers and whiteboard ideas, kind of give our feedback. It was a fantastic time, and I wish it would have lasted, a whole day. I think it was like a half a day or something, but yeah, so it's back. Yay. Thanks to Docker for listening to us.
Nice.
All right, so I wanted to mention, by the way, this is the Garrus, I put this in chat, so if you're in chat, the advanced Docker image build patterns, and he has this great deck. Of course, the talk would be better, but they didn't make that public, and he basically went on Twitter and said, what are your biggest problems with building? And then all these people, let's see if I can find that. Yeah. So people started giving him the ways they use Docker back in tweets, and then he went and basically would give you examples of how he optimized their or fixed their problem or optimized their setup. So it's a pretty good slide deck, and he has, along with it, a repo. Any great talk has a great open source repo with it, and he has a repo that shows those examples, including makefiles and multi-stage Docker files and all that. So
nice.
One thing I can recommend, so maybe you're not at the super elite level of some of the things that are in Garrett's talk, but there is a Dockerfile best practices talk on Tuesday, the 30th from 2 to 2:40 from Tibor and Sebastian, who are both from Docker. And it is an amazing talk just about sort of like, not just 101 fundamentals, also some stuff that's like a bit more intermediate advanced, but just a really good summary of knowledge from, in my opinion, two of the most knowledgeable people at Docker. Sebastian is, I have no idea how he manages to keep an index of every single pull request that has ever been opened in his mind. But if you have any question about anything, he's the right person to ask. Mm-hmm. But the sum of all of their knowledge is in that talk, and it is truly fantastic. They gave it in Barcelona, and I would recommend it to everyone, even if you've been using Docker for years.
Yeah, it's always nice to get the people that made the software to talk about the software, because they always have some deep level awareness, and they make some off comment. And you're like, wait, what? And that just changed your worldview of that product when they just make a comment. Do you have any questions from the chat that you all would like to address?
I don't see anyone.
Hi, Ashlyn.
I have a question for you, Brett, though.
I see Lee. Captain Lee. Sorry, go ahead.
Have you heard or maybe discussed with someone at Docker regarding Swarm and a GitOps pattern?
I have not. Why, you got something?
I was just thinking of, I mean, like, I know that there's a popular tendency now, which is like have everything versioned in GitHub or Git, and then make your orchestrator actually grab your infrastructure or your application configuration from a Git repo or somewhere else, and then apply it like to your cluster, more like a pull approach instead of a push, like right. Not having a CI/CD systems actually talk to your cluster, basically, because there are some security concerns and stuff. And I was wondering, I know that there's a lot of tooling in the Kubernetes ecosystem, but I don't know if there's actually something out there for Swarm.
Well, there's a couple of things that, let me see if I can find this. So I think a couple of thoughts, rather. The first one was, even though SSH sometimes can be a kludgy way to do it, the fact that we now have the Docker CLI is able to SSH in straight from that. I've been shifting, anyone who had like a pipeline in their CI solution that was going to take a webhook and then SSH into the servers and then run SSH commands, I have them, I'm trying to get them to stop that and take one step back and still use SSH, but use it through the Docker command line tools. So those of you who are not aware of what we're talking about, in 1809 release of Docker, there's now a new way that you can have the Docker command line client talk to a remote engine, but it can use SSH to do that instead of needing you to set up TLS certificates on your engines, which was a lot of work and a pain to manage those certificates and to properly secure them across different servers and rotate them and all that stuff. So now you can do that with SSH, and you don't have to leave, like your CI host doesn't have to leave itself to actually do a permanent SSH command on make an actual connection to a server and run a bunch of tools, because then once you start doing that, piping in commands and files and stuff like that gets a little weird. So that's one thing. The other is I'm hoping that Docker app will help solve some of this problem by allowing us to ship, like instead of having to check out a repo with YAML for stack files, that Docker app allows us to ship these images. So maybe the CI path takes the webhook from your Git repo, takes that YAML, properly stores the YAML in an image, just like it would your code, ship that up to your repo, and then your repo does essentially another webhook to your CI on a different pipeline that would then ship that image as a stack file, if that makes sense. So nice. yeah, if anyone out there hasn't seen, a couple weeks ago, you can actually look back on my YouTube channel. A couple weeks ago, we had Michael Irwin on, and he went through the whole Docker app CNAB setup, and he talked about how taking your compose files, your stack files, putting those into images with the Docker app command line, and then you can take those images and put them just like any other artifact in a registry like Docker Hub or any other registry, because it's just an object in a registry. It doesn't really need Docker Hub, but Docker Hub now has a UI for that. You can see them, and that means that like if you were deploying, I don't know, WordPress blog, you can now take that YAML file with the database and the websites and maybe the caching, front-end Nginx or whatever you have in that compose file, and you can ship that as its own image, so that all of the stuff you need, rather than having to go to GitHub and download a repo and all that stuff. But in terms of GitOps, so I think like Docker app to me gives me another abstraction, so I don't have to clone that repo, right? And do a pull on that, and we can stick with the artifacts instead of the code repo in that.
That's very nice. Yeah.
There are several tools, and so on the other side of this, there are several tools that I know of. None that I would say are big and popular, but a friend of mine actually created one that's a simple webhook watcher as a swarm service that will allow you to register webhooks, and then you can tell GitHub, hey, every time there's this webhook, basically download this YAML file and then deploy it as a stack. So that's kind of GitOps, right?
Yep, that's right.
And I like the Docker app scenario better, just because I feel like keeping everything in images is cleaner. But if you're wanting to stick with, simpler scenarios, right, simpler setups would use that. And I'm actually looking for that URL.
Yeah, that's gonna be interesting.
It's not that complex of a solution, right? It just needs to be a web server running webhooks listeners, and then it runs a Docker exec against, or a Docker command against the host, right?
Yeah.
And,
exactly.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look for it and then put it in the chat. So, by the way, if you're trying, I see that Daniel is in my chat and he's trying to post links, I think. And links don't work. Yeah. Long live SwarmKit. All right, so I approve those links. So yeah, in case you're wondering, they're held for moderation or whatever. All right, so if you don't see any questions in chat, I'm going to check one last time on mine. Pooja asks, we have an old server at our company and we want to Dockerize our application. Our application UI is in JavaScript plus HTML backend and Java source repo, WinCVS. Pretty old, I know, but we are stuck with one obfuscation tool, database, MySQL. We can set up CI for Windows and Linux platform and have images deployed in private server, and we want to run it in AWS. But how? If you could help us solve, that would be awesome. Okay, so...
Okay, Brett, do you have another hour?
No, this is a great question, but I think you're asking a little bit much of us to be able to solve that complicated setup. So maybe if you had a very, very specific question about a exact problem that you're having today, instead of having us redesign your architecture, we can set up CI for Windows and Linux platforms. So all this is doable. Just because your apps are old, I'm running containers with 15-year-old PHP apps in them. It's perfectly fine. In fact, it was so old that I think I had to build my own container of PHP because the PHP versions in Docker didn't go back, I think, to the 4.x release of PHP that I needed. So containers themselves and CI solutions themselves don't really care as long as your software can build and run on whatever operating system you need. In fact, if you haven't seen any marketing from Docker, that's part of their migration toolkit, traditional MTA, migrating traditional apps program. Docker is all about taking your old Windows 2008 apps and getting them onto a supported architecture of modern Windows without having to change any of lines of code, including old .NET apps, .NET Framework apps, and IIS apps. I know somebody that's running an ASP app, like a classic ASP, so we're talking pre.NET, pre-2001 app in Docker on a Windows Server 2019. So that's still possible. So yeah, I mean, what you're doing is possible. We just don't necessarily have the ability to create your infrastructure there. Great question, though.
There's a question in the YouTube Live channel. I think it's for Laura from PrepJot. So it goes, considering there is no Windows build tools, is it a good idea to build Windows container on Jenkins by installing Docker on it and expose the Docker daemon, or is there another way I can do this?
Dun, dun, dun. That is a good question that I actually, yes, I would say. Again, I'm not a Windows expert, and I actually don't ever use Windows, so I'm not the best person to answer this question. As far as I know, yes, you need to have the Docker daemon available to build images, but that's pretty standard. That's not like a Jenkins limitation. It's just sort of right now, aside from Canico and a couple other builder tools, Docker is really the solution for image building, especially on Windows, which is lagging behind Linux quite a bit.
Yeah, in fact, that gets easier now that we just, like the SSH feature set that I was just talking about with the 1809 release of Docker, that will be easier in your pipeline so that you don't have to manage TLS certificates and stuff like that. You can just use your standard SSH, but you have to make sure that you're enabling SSH on Windows, which is way easier nowadays on server 2019, 2018, 2020. I'm trying to remember what the new one is. 2019. 2016, that was the last one. Mm-hmm. And yeah, both of those have OpenSSH functionality built into the box, so you can download from Windows or from Microsoft. Actually, you don't even have to get third party.
Someone asked, I don't see a Jenkins X course on Udemy. Would a regular Jenkins course be relevant to Jenkins X? So this is an interesting question, and I'm just going to post something. Oh, I have too many letters. Okay, I'll fix it later. So the funny, interesting thing about Jenkins X is that there is no Jenkins in it. So it's a brand new project. So if you are going to take that course to learn about patterns for deploying your software, then I would say, yeah, totally fine. You can take those patterns and use them with Jenkins or with Circle CI or with CodeShip or with whatever thing you want. If you're looking for specifically something about Jenkins X, I would recommend going to our quick starts and tutorials. I can actually drop a link in the chat, in the Docker chat as well. There's a lot of quick starts, and similar to Play with Docker, you can open the Google Cloud Shell and then test the tutorials right in your browser, which is pretty cool. But there was another question about GitOps, and GitOps is a feature of Jenkins X, not just for managing the pipeline jobs, but also managing your application state as well. So Jenkins X is meant to be a complete developer experience from starting your project or importing your project, managing your cluster, managing Jenkins X itself, and then your application running in your cluster. So it does a lot. It's a really powerful tool. And yeah, there you go.
Nice.
So check out jenkinsx.io. All the documentation is there. There are lots and lots of repos in the Jenkins X GitHub organization. That's because we do GitOps. So there are just lots of repos for every environment. Every little thing is kind of its own Git repo. It's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. It is.
So it's Marcos approved.
It is for sure.
Website.
Yeah. Oh, you know what, Brett? I can talk about the CD Foundation, which is new. Please subscribe to our newsletter. So the CD Foundation was just announced a couple of weeks ago. And if you are someone who uses Jenkins often, you've probably, or if you contribute to the project, Jenkins has never really had a great solution to governance. There's Kosuke Kawaguchi, the founder of Jenkins, is the CTO at CloudBees. So I work with him. I'm very lucky, but we haven't really had a home for Jenkins or Jenkins X, and there's a bunch of other software that's related to delivery and software delivery. So this CD Foundation is a sibling to the CNCF. It's not about a particular style of development or a particular technology. It's about delivery. So it's kind of has a broader scope than the CNCF in some ways. But this is, a neutral home for the next generation of continuous delivery collaboration. So Jenkins X is there, Spinnaker, Tecton, lots of cool stuff.
Yeah.
The Tecton logo is really cute, I think.
Yeah, it is.
Robot Kitty.
It is Robot Kitty.
I love the domain name too. I feel like we finally have grown up as the internet when I see domain names like that. I'm like, this is not the internet of 20 years ago where everything, or just, 2 years ago when everything was .com.
Yeah. How many domains do you own, Brett?
I will not share my addiction, but dozens. How many of them, and more importantly, what the percentage of them am I actually using? I'm not a domain squatter. It's all good ideas that I plan to implement one day.
Yeah.
How many do you have?
I'm not at liberty to disclose that number.
So one that I share a lot, and I'm so glad I actually did it, was dog versus cat. Dog versus .cat. We tried to get dogversuscat.com, but I think that was taken. And then I bought a couple of domain names and realized that it was the first time that I had misspelled domain name when I bought it.
Okay.
Because it was dogs versus cat. So it was plural and singular, and I didn't realize what I was doing when I bought it. So it was late. You always buy domain names late at night. And
after a little whiskey.
Yeah, after a little bit of whiskey. Which I don't own that domain. I should get that from my dog. But this one is redirects basically to a GitHub URL that I mention so often because it's now become the home of all of my Swarm samples. So when anyone has a, how do I do this in Swarm question, I try to shove all that stuff in here as open source. And there's an increasing number of things in here, but lately I was so tired of describing the URL. I was like, why don't I just make the domain name itself redirect to the GitHub? That's very lazy, but I do it. So, yeah, I recommend it. I recommend buying all the domain names that you ever wanted. All right, so I think that's all the questions I have in my chat. I don't see anyone else in there really talking about anything. Sorry if I missed your questions. Of course, any questions you ask, I'll hang out in chat for another 20 minutes or so. So if you have questions, please put them in chat and I will get to them. If you're watching the show after the fact, then obviously we're not live. So you'll have to take us to Twitter and find us there.
Do you want to mention something about 1903, Brett? Like new features and stuff?
1903?
Yeah.
What do you know? Tell us.
There's a context for Docker, Docker context command. Have you heard about that?
No. Oh, yes, I have, but please describe it.
So basically now it allows you to configure your CLI to talk to different endpoints or contexts. So you can say, for example, the context of my development cluster or my production cluster or some other stuff. And then you can say Docker context, whatever. And then the CLI will automatically use that context instead of you setting up environmental variables.
Right. And
there's rootless containers also, some basic support out of the box. So basically you can start a Docker daemon without being root. That is something pretty cool.
So, by the way,
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry. I was going to let people know that the way that we know about this isn't just because we have some sort of insider access as captains. I mean, we do talk with engineers probably more than the average person, but it's because you can actually follow along on the releases of a lot of this software on GitHub. And so there's a repo called docker-ce that is all of the there's Moby, which is the open source, one of the pieces of the open source that gets put into the eventual Docker releases. And then there's dockercE, which is the open source engine, and it includes the command line and the engine itself. And they have recently, a week ago, just released the first beta of this upcoming semi-annual release of Docker. And Marcos is listing off some other really big features. Sorry. So please continue.
No, it's just, I think the major stuff, which is pretty interesting, is, rootless containers. The fact that you can actually spin up the Docker daemon without being root, which is pretty nice. The one that I said about context. And there's another nice feature, which is the fact that you're going to be able to write plugins for the Docker CLI. So if there's something from the CLI perspective that you would like to have integrated automatically in your specific CLI because you have some custom logic or pipelines or whatever, then you're going to be able to write some code for that, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think just in the talks that we were having the other day in the Captain's channel about some of the potential for what those plugins could be, I think it's going to be pretty exciting to see what people come up with. All right, so we have context changing, which I think will be a bigger deal moving forward than we realize. Just being able to use, as the command line keeps getting more advanced and adding more stuff, the ability to change all the different endpoints that you need, right? Not running as root. Some of us, like me, I'm fine with running root as the engine. It's basically to me it is the kernel. It is the what's running everything on my host. So or the system D, I guess, is if you're Kelsey Hightower, you would say it's system D of containers. Or he says Kubernetes is system D. So I guess maybe that makes Docker engine the kernel. I don't know. But a lot of people I know constantly are asking about, I'm not allowed to run as root, or I'm in a situation like I get students that are in labs and they get shared hosting and the way that they get their Linux host to play with them free in the labs is they get sort of a simulated root or even just a regular user, and they don't truly have root. They can't truly install Docker engine daemon. And for them, this might be a really cool option as well, because they don't have the ability, they don't have their own powerful machines, they don't have the ability to just go buy servers on the internet and rent them to install Docker. Sorry, was there anything else?
Some changes and stuff, but I believe from the overall big features, those are the most important ones, I think.
Yeah. So for me, with Swarm, I'm always scrolling down to the Swarm and the syscontrol options in services. So if you've been following along on GitHub, you know that Docker run can do lots and lots and lots of things, especially when it comes to adding permissions and doing things in elevated permissions modes and controlling different things around the kernel and the hardware on the system itself, including things like GPUs and syscontrol and all this other stuff. And you couldn't necessarily do all of that in Swarm services because the functionality just wasn't there for Swarm. It didn't have the same full set of options. So now finally we're getting syscontrol options. So I know for people that use Elasticsearch, this is a big deal because Elasticsearch likes to set syscontrol options when you run a container of it. And now we are going to be able to start doing that with Swarm. That's a pretty cool thing. Maximum replicas per node is pretty exciting for a very small amount of people, but people that have had a scenario where if they have a database cluster, they want to prevent both nodes of that database cluster, both containers, from running on the same physical node. And they maybe want to run something that scales with the number of nodes. So they want to run in global mode, but they want to, which is fine. But if they can't run global mode, they want to prevent those replicas from running on the same node. So, for example, they want to run 2 of something on every node, but no more than 2, something like that. And there hasn't been a way for us to do that. So this is another option that gives us more control into Swarm. So that's a pretty cool one.
Yeah, pretty nice stuff.
So I'm sure that Docker is going to be announcing all kinds of stuff around that at DockerCon, especially on the open source day. The second day of DockerCon tends to be more open source announcements and less big product announcements. And hopefully we'll talk more about this also on the third day, the open source Summit Day as well. All right, so we're going to wrap this up because we've been here for a little bit over an hour. So I thank you so much for joining us. Marcos, where can people find you on the internet?
So you can find me at Marcos Niels in Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, I don't know, whatever social network it's out there. So, or write me an email at marcosniels, that would be marcosnils@gmail.com.
Nice. Giving out your email on the air, professional.
Yeah.
You can tell a true open sourcer, right? Like, just reach out to me. I'm available. And Laura, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter. I am at RhineWine with an underscore in the middle. It's probably easier to go to Brett's Twitter and get my handle from him because German's a difficult language. So it's RHEIN_WEIN, the German spelling, not the English spelling.
And sometimes you might still be Laura Frank or Laura Frank Tacho, so people see
Some
that.
places I'm Laura Frank Tacho. Some places I'm just Laura Tacho. I think some places that I don't know, I'm still Laura Frank. I might be that. But
if you're on Twitter and you find beer on the top part on the header, then you know you're on the right.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm doing kind of a rolling update of my name change. It's been it's been almost a year, but it takes a while.
Yeah, it'll never go away. You'll find something in 10 years that's still outdated. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for joining. Of course, you're always welcome back on the show, and I will be seeing you in 18 days at DockerCon, which is super exciting.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
And
Nice.
yes, I know I feel like we were just at DockerCon last month. Like it's happened very quickly. So we'll all be together in San Francisco. We'll probably be on YouTube Lives at the event, depending on how well the Wi-Fi works and everything. So you can expect to see events from us there. We will be back here next week, this same Thursday, same time, for the next 2 Thursdays, talking about with other Docker captains, friends of ours, basically, that are going to be at DockerCon and what they're talking about, what they're doing at DockerCon. And we will see you next week on YouTube Live. Ciao.
Take care.
Amazing.
Ciao.
See ya.